The summer of 1885 came down hard on the Dakota Territory, the way it always did, without apology, without shade, without mercy for the small things left standing in the open. The red dust roads stretched long and empty between settlements, and a man could ride for half a day without seeing a soul, which made it all the worse that on one such road, just east of the Willow Creek Valley, a child had been left behind. Her name was Maggie Bell Heart. She was 8 years old, and she had done everything right. She had stood still like Eliza told her. She had not cried. She had not called out. She had held her bundle to her chest and watched the covered wagon roll away through the haze, the canvas side swaying once in the hot wind, then going flat and indifferent as a closed door. Eliza had said she was tying something down. She had said, "Wait here." Maggie waited. The wagon grew smaller. The sound of the wheels thinned to nothing. The dust settled back onto the road the way water settles after a stone has been thrown in, as if nothing had broken the surface at all. There was no one who would tell Eliza what she had done. No law in the territory would chase a woman for forgetting a child on a stretch of empty road. And no one standing in Cheyenne or Deadwood or any place with a name would know that a little girl was counting to 100 on a baked clay road, with a buzzard beginning to turn lazy circles overhead. But there was a man, a line rider named Gideon Reed, who came down from the ridge that morning following his own quiet conscience, and he would choose to stop. This is their story, a tale of a child the world tried to set down like something no longer needed, and the man who proved she was worth every mile of the road ahead. Now, Maggie was not the kind of child who made noise about her suffering. She had learned that early. In her mother's house, before the coughing took her mother away, there had been love that didn't need saying. Then her mother was gone, and Eliza came, and the house learned a different language. One of absence, of drawers that never had enough in them, of looks that measured and found wanting. Maggie learned to be small. She learned to eat what was given and not ask for more. She learned to sleep quietly even when the cold came through the wallboards. She was not a weak child. You could see it in the way she stood on that road, spine straight, boot heels pressed together, eyes tracking the wagon until it was gone. She was the kind of small that takes a great deal of strength to maintain. Her bundle held 3 things: a change of clothes grown tight at the shoulders, a tin button she had found in the grass the spring her mother died, and Clara. Clara was a cloth doll stitched by her mother's hands during a winter when there wasn't much else to do. One button eye had come loose and been lost somewhere along the trail. The stuffing had flattened over years of being held through hard nights. Clara's dress was faded to a color that had once been blue, but Maggie carried her the way other children carry lanterns. Not because she looked like much, but because she gave off light in the dark. Maggie counted to 100, then counted again, then a third time. The buzzard dipped lower. She did not sit. She told herself that sitting meant giving up on the possibility that the wagon might turn around. She was still holding that possibility when she heard the sound, one horse, coming steady from the ridge above the road. The man who appeared was not what fear makes you imagine. He was broad through the shoulders, dusty-coated, with gray coming in at his beard, and the kind of unhurried movement that belonged to someone who had learned not to startle the things he cared about. He rode down the slope without rushing, read the road ahead of him, saw the child standing alone in the heat, and stopped 10 paces off. He did not call out, did not announce himself, just sat his horse and let her look at him. "You lost," he said at last. His voice was the dry, unhurried kind, like mesquite bark. Maggie shook her head. He looked at the empty road stretching both directions. He took note of the single set of boot prints where she stood, the wagon tracks rolling away, the undisturbed dust around her feet. Left behind then? This time she didn't answer, because there wasn't a word that fit yet. The man swung down from his horse in one slow motion, careful not to move too fast or take up too much of the air around her. He crouched down to her level, hat in one hand. "My name's Gideon Reed. What's yours?" She looked at him for a long moment, then, "Maggie." He nodded. Not at her name exactly, but at something about how she'd said it, like he understood it had cost her something. "That's a strong name." His eyes moved to the bundle she was gripping. "And who's this?" Maggie's arms tightened a fraction. Then she said, "Good name, too." He stood. "Come on, let's get you something to eat and some water." She didn't move yet. He didn't press. He just stood there with his horse at his side, both of them patient in the heat, like they had all the afternoon and then some, and then Maggie put her hand in his. It was not a grand moment, not the kind that announces itself, but you better believe it was enough, because a child who has learned not to reach out, reaching, that is its own kind of miracle. They rode slow, the two of them on the same horse, Maggie in the saddle and Gideon behind her. He let her have the silence. He didn't ask about Eliza. Didn't ask where they'd come from, or where the wagon was headed, or why a grown woman would leave a child on a baked road in the middle of summer with a buzzard overhead and nothing but a cloth doll for company. Instead, he pointed out the country as they moved through it. "That rise over there. We call it Widow's Bluff. Storms come down from the north and catch their breath before they cross the valley." Maggie looked. "That creek below the cottonwoods runs cold even in August. Good fishing, if you know where to wait." She said nothing, but her shoulders had come down a half-inch from where they'd been riding near her ears. As the light turned amber and the shadows reached long, Gideon brought them down to a creek where the water ran clear over smooth stones. He built a small fire with the easy competence of someone who had done it 10,000 times, and from his saddlebag he produced a tin of beans, a square of cornbread wrapped in cloth, and a cup of water warmed by the coals. He handed her the food without ceremony and sat across the fire to give her room. Maggie ate with her hands shaking slightly, the way people eat when they don't quite trust that the plate will stay. She ate every bit. Gideon did not comment on how fast or how much, or ask if she wanted more. When the tin was clean, he refilled her cup. The fire popped. Then Maggie looked up through the smoke and asked the question that had been sitting in her chest all day. "Why did she leave me?" Gideon did not tell her it was a misunderstanding. He did not say Eliza would come back. He did not shift the weight of the answer onto Maggie's small shoulders. He looked into the fire for a moment and said, "Some folks break quiet, some break loud, but most times the breaking has nothing to do with the child." Maggie stared into the coals. "She always said I was too much trouble." "A child who eats and sleeps and needs things isn't trouble," Gideon said. "That's just a child." She held Clara to her chest and did not speak again that night. But when Gideon laid his bedroll near the fire and set his hat brim down in the dirt, Maggie curled up on the blanket he spread beside it. Her hand rested close to his. Not touching, just near. He stayed up another hour, watching the fire burn down, one eye on the road behind them. She slept without dreaming of running. Willow Creek Ranch appeared the next morning like something the land had grown rather than built. The fence lines ran gentle curves around the golden fields. The cottonwoods along the creek cast broad shadows. The house sat on a low rise, modest in its bones but well cared for, with smoke already rising from the chimney and the front door standing open on its hinges. Gideon brought his horse to the yard. A woman came out onto the porch, wiping flour from her hands on a cloth apron. She was not young, but she was not old. She moved with a stillness that came from knowing exactly where everything in her world belonged. And the way she stopped when she saw Maggie told you this was something outside that knowledge. "Gideon," she said. "Isabella." He swung down and lifted Maggie from the saddle. "This is Maggie Bell." Isabella looked at the child, the torn dress, the worn boots, the doll with one eye missing. She took one long breath. "Come in," she said, not with fanfare, not with the kind of warmth that could frighten a wary child. "Just come in. I expect she's hungry." The kitchen smelled like stew and bread and something else, a particular warmth that comes from a room used daily and cared for. Real plates on real shelves. Sunlight cutting across the floorboards in clean lines. Maggie stood in the doorway and took it in the way someone takes a deep breath before stepping into water they're not sure of. Isabella set a bowl on the table, pulled out a chair, sat down across from her with her own cup of coffee, and said nothing. No questions, no demands, no you must eat with both hands, or where did you say you were from, or what happened exactly. Just, here is a bowl, here is a spoon, here is time. Maggie ate. When she finished, Isabella rose and filled it again without being asked. After the second bowl, Isabella led her to the washroom. There's a bed upstairs, she said. Soft, you can leave your things. She glanced at Clara. Don't worry about cleaning the doll. She's earned her dirt. That night, Maggie lay beneath a quilt stitched with small star shapes and listened to the house settle around her. No slamming, no voices raised. Just whined in the eaves and the distant sound of Gideon moving through the house below, boots quiet on the boards, lamps being turned down one by one. She pressed Clara against her collarbone. She did not sleep for a long time. Because hope, when it comes back after a long absence, is not comfortable. It sits in your chest like a stone you're not sure is a stone or a seed. But the house held still around her, and by the time the moon moved over the window, Maggie slept. The days at Willow Creek Ranch began before dawn and ended when the dark said so. Maggie rose with the household and discovered that work here was not the kind done under threat. Gideon showed her how to tie a saddle strap, standing beside her at the hitching post with patient hands, saying try again when she got the knot wrong, never once reaching to fix it himself before she'd had the chance. He showed her how to brush down a horse, firm but easy, moving with the direction of the coat, letting the animal know where you were before you touched it. They don't like surprises, he said. Neither do I, Maggie said. He glanced down at her. One corner of his mouth shifted. I know. She read with Isabella in the evenings, following the lamp's circle of light across words she was still learning to trust. Pioneer, prairie, belong. She helped with the bread, flour dusting her nose, the dough resistant, and then yielding beneath her palms in a way that felt like something worth knowing. She cried twice that first week. Once when a tin cup slipped from her hands and clattered on the floorboards, and she flinched before it even finished falling, waiting for something that didn't come. Once when she found a blue hair ribbon in a drawer of the sewing room and couldn't say why it made her chest ache. Both times Isabella came and sat beside her, not asking, not soothing with words, just setting her hand between Maggie's shoulder blades and letting the weight of it say, I'm here, I'm not leaving. One afternoon, watching Gideon mend fence in the long afternoon light, Maggie climbed through the rails and stood beside him in the grass. You don't have to keep me, she said. He drove the fence post another inch without looking up. I know. Maggie kicked at a clump of dry earth. I might be more trouble than you think. Might be. He stood, brushed his hands on his trousers, finally met her eyes. But I reckon trouble and I are old enough acquaintances, haven't scared me off yet. She looked down at her boots. I'd like to stay. And you will, he said. Simple, flat, the way you state a thing that isn't up for debate. That night, after the dishes were cleared and Isabella had gone to check the horses, Maggie sat across from Gideon at the fire. She had been carrying a word around in her mouth for 3 days, turning it over, testing its weight, unsure if she had the right to use it. She set down her cup. Papa? Gideon didn't startle. He didn't look up quickly or say, now hold on. He just went still, like a man hearing something he had thought was gone from his life for good. Then he nodded once. All right then, he said, just that. All right then, but it was the kind of all right that meant, yes, and always, and I will not let you down. Gideon Reed carried his own wound, though he wore it the way he wore everything, quietly. He had lost a child once, a daughter born at Willow Creek in the dead of winter, who had breathed her first and last breaths in the same hour. He had buried her beneath the cottonwood at the edge of the south field, and afterward had not been the kind of man to speak of it, but it had shaped him the way cold shapes iron, slower, harder in some places, more brittle in others, and with a knowledge of grief that no man comes to easily. It was Isabella who had kept him from going cold with it. She had been at Willow Creek for 7 years, come as a widow with a knowledge of kitchens and livestock and the particular stubbornness required to keep a ranch alive through bad winters. They had not named what had grown between them. Some things take a long time to be spoken, and some need a catalyst they cannot arrange for themselves. One evening, Isabella stood at the window watching Maggie in the yard below, the girl sitting cross-legged in the dirt, showing Clara the evening star the way someone might introduce a friend to a good place. "She's afraid of being loved," Isabella said quietly. Gideon stood beside her. "She's more afraid of being unloved and not knowing it until it's too late." Isabella turned to look at him. "That's the same thing." He held her gaze. "I know." Neither of them said anything more that night. But the space between them had shifted the way a door that's been stuck sometimes shifts on its hinges without anyone touching it. Maggie was the third person in that shift. She had moved into the house like a small, serious presence that took up exactly the space required and not 1 inch more. And somehow, in the taking up of that space, she had made visible what had always been there between the other two. They were already a family. They were only waiting for someone to name it. Trouble arrived on a Tuesday, the way trouble usually does, in good boots and with a folded piece of paper. Gideon came in from the barn that morning to find a wagon pulled up in the yard. 2 figures on the bench, a woman with her bonnet drawn tight against the sun and a man beside her in a coat that had seen more town than country. They sat very still, which was how you could tell they had not come to stay but to take. Gideon stepped onto the porch, hand resting easy on the post near the door. Cyrus Graves climbed down first. He was not a large man, but he carried himself with the particular sureness of someone who believed papers gave him size. Eliza followed, her boots touching the earth with distaste, her eyes moving directly to the house window where Maggie's small shape could be seen through the glass. "Gideon Reed," Cyrus said. "We've come about the girl." Gideon said nothing. "Maggie Bell Heart. Eliza here is her legal stepmother. The child belongs with her family." Behind him the door opened. Isabella stepped out and placed herself between Cyrus and the window without making a show of it. "She's got family here," Isabella said. Eliza's voice came sharp. "She has a legal guardian." Cyrus produced the folded paper, guardianship, signed before Judge Silas Trent. "The law's clear on this." Gideon looked at the paper without taking it. His jaw was tight, but his voice came out level. "A woman who leaves a child on an empty road in summer heat and rides away isn't a guardian. She's a danger." Eliza's face moved through several expressions quickly. There was confusion. She wandered from the wagon. "Children who wander," Isabella said, "are found and brought back. They aren't left with boot prints standing still in the dust for half a mile." Cyrus stepped forward. "However it happened, the law is what the law is. She comes with us today, or we return with a sheriff." Gideon did not raise his voice. He met Cyrus's eyes and said, "She doesn't go anywhere today. You want to take this before a judge? Then we'll take it before a judge. A real one. Not a man who signs papers without asking questions." Cyrus drew himself up. "This isn't finished." "No," Gideon said, "it isn't. But you've got a long ride back, and I'd suggest you take it." The wagon turned in the yard and rolled away. Maggie stood inside the kitchen, Clara pressed tight against her chest, watching through the gap in the curtain. "They'll come back," she whispered that night to Clara in the dark, "but they're not taking us." The word "us" sat in the room like a small, stubborn flame. There was something Gideon had not spoken aloud yet, not because he had forgotten it, but because he had been waiting until he could speak it where it would matter most. Maggie's mother, her real mother, Margaret Bell, had owned a small parcel of land in the Willow Creek Valley. It was not much, 40 acres, a water right, and a homestead claim filed before she died. But she had filed it in Maggie's name, or rather in the name of her heir, signed with the particular foresight of a woman who could read the shape of what was coming and wanted to leave her daughter, something the world couldn't easily take. Eliza had known. So had Cyrus. Who was Eliza's brother-in-law? A man with debts and a careful eye for anything that might clear them. The land wasn't worth much by the standards of men with money in the bank. But in the Dakota Territory, 40 acres with water was the difference between a future and the lack of one. They had not come back for Maggie out of love. They had come back because someone in the county clerk's office had mentioned the filed claim, and suddenly the child they had set down on the road like an unwanted parcel was worth something again. Gideon had found the original filing among the few things in Maggie's bundle, a folded paper pressed flat at the bottom beneath Clara, written in her mother's hand. He had shown it to no one yet. He showed it to Isabella the night before the hearing. She read it twice, folded it, and placed it on the table between them. She knew, Isabella said. Her mother? Gideon nodded. She was careful. She did what she could. Isabella looked at him steadily. You kept this quiet because you wanted it said in the right place. A courtroom, he said, where Cyrus can't shrug it off. She looked at the paper for a long moment, then she looked up at him. Gideon, whatever happens in that courthouse, Maggie stays with us. Papers or no papers, land or no land. He met her eyes. I know that, he said, but I'd rather the law say it too. The courthouse was a square stone room on the edge of the nearest settlement, with a flagstone floor and windows that let in more dust than light. Judge Alton Hayes presided from a raised desk of plain pine, silver-haired, watchful, the kind of man who had heard every version of every story and could tell within 3 sentences which one had truth in it. Gideon and Isabella took their seats on one side. Maggie sat between them, Clara tucked in the crook of her arm. She had dressed carefully that morning in her cleanest dress, and she had said nothing at all the whole ride into town, just looked out at the country with a face that was working very hard at stillness. Cyrus and Eliza sat opposite with their lawyer, papers spread on the table before them like a hand of cards they were confident in. Cyrus spoke first. Guardianship legally established, step-parental relationship recognized by the county. The child had family, blood family, a proper home to return to. What claim did a rancher have over a child not his own? Gideon stood. He did not use elaborate language. He did not perform. He stated what he had seen. A child standing alone on a road in the July heat, with boot prints that had not moved, surrounded by dust that had settled back over the wagon tracks as if the wagon had not even slowed. A child who had not been given water, not given food, not given any instruction about what to do if no one came back. She wasn't lost, he said. She was left. Eliza began an explanation. Confusion, she said. A misunderstanding. The child had wandered. Isabella placed Maggie's bundle on the table. She opened it. She laid out what was inside. A change of clothes, too small by now. A tin button. Clara. If a woman stepped away to tie down her wagon and expected to return, Isabella said she would leave the child's food. Her water, her extra shoes. She looked at the bundle. There is nothing here a person would leave with a child they intended to collect. There is only what a person gives a child they intend to set down for good. The courtroom went quiet. Then Gideon drew out the folded paper. He unfolded it and handed it to Judge Hayes. Hayes read it. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. This is a land filing, he said. In Maggie Bell Heart's name, Gideon said, filed by her mother before she died. 40 acres with water rights in the Willow Creek Valley. I believe that's why this hearing is happening. Cyrus made a sound. His lawyer touched his arm. Hayes looked from the paper to Eliza, then to Cyrus. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You left the child on the road without food or water or shelter in July. And now you're asking this court to return her to your custody?" Eliza's composure had gone thin and tight at the edges. "We have a legal right. You have a legal filing," Hayes said. "That's different from a right." He set the paper down and looked at Maggie for the first time directly. Child. The room went absolutely still. Even the dust in the shafts of window light seemed to pause. Maggie looked up at the judge. She did not look at Eliza. She did not look at Cyrus. "Yes, sir. Tell me where you want to live." Maggie's hands tightened around Clara until her knuckles went pale. Then she set her jaw in a way that was not 8 years old at all, and she stepped forward, one step into the open space between the two sides. Not loud, not shaking, just clear. "I want to stay with Papa Gideon and Miss Isabella." Hayes said, "Why?" She thought about it for one breath. "Because they don't make me be something different to earn a place at their table. And because they don't go." The last 3 words fell into the room and did not come back out. Cyrus opened his mouth. His lawyer touched his arm again. Hayes picked up the guardianship filing Cyrus had placed on the table. He looked at it for a long moment, then folded it in half and set it aside. "The child stays," he said. Cyrus stood. "The blood relationship, I've heard enough about blood," Hayes said. His voice had not risen, but something in it had settled, the way a door settles into its frame. "When it comes before me that bloodkin left a child with nothing and is now petitioning to take her back once she has something worth taking." He looked at Cyrus squarely. "The only claim I recognize today is love, and I have seen which side of this room it sits on." The gavel came down once. Eliza rose and left without speaking. Cyrus followed, jaw tight, boots loud on the flagstone. The room let out a breath. Gideon placed his hand on Maggie's shoulder, and she turned and pressed her face against his coat and held on with both arms. He did not say anything. He just stood there and let her. Isabella had her face turned away and was very still for a moment. When she turned back, her eyes were wet, but she was not crying in the way that needs tending. Outside, in the bright September sun, Gideon looked at Isabella across Maggie's head. She looked back at him. He said, "I want to do this right, not just for Maggie." Isabella's mouth curved. "Are you sure you haven't got sunstroke?" "No," he said. "Just a man with no more reason to wait." She took his hand. They were married under the courthouse eaves, with Judge Hayes reading the words and the sheriff standing witness and Maggie between them, holding Clara in the crook of one arm and Isabella's hand in the other. She repeated every vow under her breath, lips moving just a fraction behind the judge's, as if she was learning the language of permanence by heart. When Gideon kissed Isabella, it was brief and sure, the kind of kiss that does not need an audience. It said, "Here, this, from now on." Maggie pressed her face against Isabella's arm and whispered to Clara, "We have a family." 6 years passed over Willow Creek Ranch the way good seasons do, without calling attention to themselves, simply arriving and doing their work. Maggie turned 14, and by then the ranch had her shape all through it. The horses knew her step. The bread came out better when she helped. Thomas Griggs's boy from the neighboring claim had learned his letters sitting at the kitchen table while she read aloud, patient as the hills. A colt had bolted toward the ravine one spring morning, and she had brought it back single-handed, rope singing out clean and true in the early light. She was not the child who had stood on the road anymore. She was something grown from that child, the way a sapling grows from the seed of something that endured a hard winter. Clara still sat on the shelf in her room, one eye still missing, the stuffing still flat, the dress still faded to a color that had once been blue. Maggie had been offered a new doll twice and had said no thank you without explaining why. Clara was not a toy anymore. She was a record, a witness to everything that had come before. One evening in the slow gold of harvest, Maggie stood at the fence line watching the ridge line where she had first seen Gideon come down off the hill. Behind her the ranch moved in its evening rhythm. Isabella calling for supper, Emma and little Jack laughing over something in the yard, Gideon closing the barn doors with the particular two-handed pull that meant the work of the day was done. Gideon came and stood beside her. "Quiet?" he said, thinking. About what? Maggie kept her eyes on the ridge. About what to build next. He looked out with her. "Something new?" "A place," she said, "for children like I was, the ones who are standing on the road somewhere, counting to 100 and waiting for someone to come back." She paused. "I want to build something where they don't have to wait anymore." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "You've got the heart for it. I've got the people," she said, "and the land. That 40 acres Mama left me is just sitting." He looked at her then, and there was something in his face that was not quite grief and not quite pride, but something that lived between them. The thing that happens when you watch a wounded creature learn not just to survive, but to run. "Then we best get to planning," he said. That night, after Emma and Jack were asleep and the fire had burned to its comfortable low, Maggie sat at the table and opened her journal. Not for school, not for anyone else. Just for the record, she wrote, "My name is Maggie Bell Heart. I was once left behind on a road in the middle of summer, and I counted to 103 times while a buzzard circled overhead, and my boots left prints in the dust that did not move. And then someone stopped and asked my name and waited until I was ready to take his hand. I was not saved because I was worth saving by anyone's measure. I was saved because one man with a quiet horse decided to stop, and one woman decided to put a bowl of food on the table without conditions, and one house decided to open its door. I will spend the rest of my life making sure other children don't have to count to 100 alone." She set down her pen. On the shelf by the window, Clara sat in the moonlight, one-eyed, threadbare, worn all the way down to whatever had always been essential. Outside. The prairie wind moved through the grass like something with a long memory and a patient heart, and the door of Willow Creek Ranch stood open, the way it always had, the way it always would. Because some homes are not built with lumber and nails, they are built with the choice to stay, and the choice to let the next lost child in, and the choice, made again and again, to not be the kind of person who drives away while a small girl stands in the road still hoping. Love does not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrives like a man on a dusty horse, asking a simple question, and then waiting, quiet, patient, and unhurried, for the answer. That is the only miracle that matters, and it is available to anyone willing to stop. Thank you for watching. This channel is no longer supported by ads, and these stories continue because people believe they matter. Patreon is a quiet way to support the work with early access, story previews, and small moments of input before each tale is fully told. On screen now is a preview of the Patreon page. If you'd like to support the channel, the invitation is in the first pinned comment down below. I'll see you in the next story.